Hello everyone, my name is Paul from the New News, and I hope that you, your family, and your friends are safe, and if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. Normally, I am rather uplifting, or try to be relatively positive throughout the streams and the intro, and today's news is not uplifting. Not that it normally is. There are a lot of problems in our world today, and as I speak to you tonight, there are emergency workers and crews and first responders globally. They're sifting through the destroyed remnants of homes and lives. They are doing everything that they can to help people. Fires are raging across Ukraine and Ethiopia. That is the reality of the world that we live in today. The news is relatively depressing. It is, to look at every day and to report on. But we have to bring awareness to these issues. We have to see these things and talk about these things, because if we do not, then nothing will be done about these issues. In the world, there are 345 million people, according to the United Nations, that require humanitarian aid due to food and water insecurities. That number has more than tripled from 80 million as of 2021. There are multiple large-scale conflicts ongoing throughout the world. There's genocide and ethnic cleansing happening in multiple locations throughout the world. And political upheaval in places that we either never expected or that we may have expected or seen, but simply wasn't done. Nothing was done to stop it. And most aid, while it does arrive, arrives far too little, too late. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, December 7th, the Admiral of the Pacific Fleet received a telegram from Washington, D.C. after the 14th part of a 14-part letter was delivered by the Japanese embassy to the United States, and it stated that an attack on Pearl Harbor was imminent. He stated that they were only an hour late, as he watched the burning wrecks and hulks of the Pacific Fleet laying there in the water, and thousands of American troops having already been killed by the Japanese. Sometimes it feels as though that seems to be the situation. We hope only to be able to prevent that in the future. In the meantime, here at the New News, we try to report on the news, and at least with a clearly stated bias or an unbiased opinion, or at least apolitical. However, it would appear that sometimes with geopolitical situations, there is no middle ground. We continue to maintain that with Ukraine and against any other atrocities being committed globally, regardless of what nation is doing them. At the New News, we like to be able to be the news that gives back, to give a little bit of hope back to the absolutely disastrous situations ongoing throughout the world. So I please implore you to check out the video description, and I please implore you to check out and give back to all of those wonderful organizations. We've gone through and vetted them, and each of those individuals, fundraisers, and organizations, 80% or more of their proceeds go directly to their programs and to helping people. We here at the New News will always remain charity-driven, 100%. We're never doing super chats. We're never monetizing any of this. We're never doing any of that. We want everything to go to charity. We want to help people. So please, in this very relatively dark time, If you cannot give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's okay. Help us grow this project, help us grow our impact, so that way we can help even more people. Because there's a lot of people who need it. A lot of people who need it. I will warn you that today these topics are dark. These images are impactful, but they're important to be seen. If you have any questions throughout the stream, please feel free to ask. I am watching the live chat, and I will be able, if you're joining us live, please make comments and ask questions. I will answer them to the best of my ability. To give you a little bit of a background on myself, I was an O-352 anti-tank missileman in the United States Marine Corps between 2016 and 2020. My first tour of duty, I went to Syria for 4.5 months and a month and a half in Kuwait between October of 2017 and March of 2018. My second tour, I was in charge of the anti-armor team at the with Crisis Response Company out of Kuwait, and I oversaw anti-armor operations when I was one of the 100 Marines that responded to the Baghdad Embassy compound on New Year's of 2020. And then I also trained Saudi Arabian Marines for a brief period of time as they were getting ready to deploy to Yemen. I am a subject matter expert in anti-armor warfare and armored doctrine. I'm also a fully cross-trained machine gunner, a CLS Marine, and of course a fully cross-trained rifleman. And I also was a partially cross-trained radio operator. Outside of that, I try to maintain a well-rounded knowledge in a lot of other subjects, especially history, as well as other geopolitical situations. I will answer your questions to the best of my ability. However, I always implore that you do your own research whenever you're talking about or whenever you're interested in these topics. Don't believe everything you hear on the internet. But with that, I will jump right into Ukraine here, which is our special report. However, there was a question that came in here right before. And the question comes from Satirical Gamer, who asks, do you think Belarus, along with some Russian divisions, will attack from the north as a last-ditch effort to take Kyiv? There's been a lot of talk of this, and we'll get to a little bit of that beforehand. It is possible that Belarus may open a second front against Ukraine with what they report as 500,000 troops. There's been unconfirmed reports of Russian troop movements into Belarus, as it appears to be a new staging ground. It's possible that due to the losses in the east, that Belarus and Russia, which do share a union still, despite the collapse of the Soviet Union, may attempt to open a second front to alleviate pressures on the troops on the eastern side of the country in a last-ditch effort to take out the Ukrainian leadership and to take over the rest of Ukraine. Do I think that that's possible? The Belarusian army probably is no better, if not worse equipped than the Russian army is, depending on how you see it. While it is 500,000 additional troops, reportedly, it does not necessarily mean they have the capacity to fight this war. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to do very well. These areas are still guarded, and there are still entire Ukrainian units that are stationed in the north for that very same reason. The possibility is there, however, it may be more likely that Russia will try to solidify its holdings and try to replace these manpower issues that they are having with trained forces from Belarus out in the eastern part of the country. We begin our night here in Ukraine in Lviv. Lviv was one of the targets of today's strikes, as most of the news that came out in the last 48 hours is about these strikes. I'm sure you've seen most of it already on television from any of those mainstream networks. Coming here into Lviv, Lviv was struck by Russian missiles, considered a relatively safe place in Ukraine by comparison, as this is actually where many of these major relief efforts are currently being run out of. Not the capital, but Lviv here, one of the first major centers you come to, coming across the border from Poland, was struck today. It is out of power for the most part, and there are still many people that are having candlelit dinners there in and around this city after Russian forces targeted critical infrastructure that stopped all electricity and running water. Up to 90% of the city of Lviv was actually out of those basic necessities, as was much of the country today, especially in those major cities. This is coming from Lviv. These are the strikes from Lviv. This is coming from Amin Zepar, who is a member of the Verkhovna Rada, or the Ukrainian Parliament. And this is coming from the Ukrainian Parliament as well. This is one of those first responders today who has had a very, very long shift. There is a little bit of good news out of Lviv, and that's because a school student actually assembled a generator for Ukrainian troops. Zakhar Sharuko is still in school, but he has a relatively brilliant mind and a good set of hands. He created a charging station that can charge almost anything. He's already made about 10 of these for Ukrainian troops.
Контролер, інвертор, різні комплектуючі. Навіть сам ящик, сонячна панель. Це все треба. Більшість я замовляю. Те, що є у Львові, я стараюсь купляти у Львові, щоб не платити за доставку зайвий раз.
Что станцию можно использовать как дополнительный источник питания в полевых условиях.
Зарядна станція, яка може заряджатися ось від сонячної панелі. Тут є порти, 4 порти USB, 2 швидка зарядка, 2 звичайних, одна автомобільна розетка 12 вольт та одна розетка 220 вольт на 200 Вт.
Себестоимость такого пауэрбанка около $500. Начало войны России против Украины изменило жизнь парня. Говорит, наконец-то пришло время воплотить идею, которая зрела еще до пандемии. Он копил деньги на ноутбук, брат на велосипед, но решили деньги инвестировать в первую станцию, и уже в мае ее собрали. Сейчас их насчитывается около 10.
Акумулятор.
So a very, very brilliant mind there indeed. Nice work there, Zakhar. Nice work. Of course, the main stories of today come out of Kyiv, which was struck multiple times by missiles today as a result of the very widespread bombardment by the Russians, the largest bombardment in the duration of the war thus far. And the missile strikes in Kyiv certainly had a very drastic impact. So they knocked out power and running water to a lot of Kyiv, damaging homes and businesses, and killing a relatively unknown number of people. Reportedly 5, and as many as 5 people have been killed, many more being injured. First responders are still coming through what's left of the debris, and they're trying to conduct body recovery and search for survivors. That casualty number is expected to climb significantly over the next 24 to 48 hours. Quote, rocket attacks on Kyiv and the region on October the 10th. 5 people were killed and 51 citizens were injured. Local critical infrastructure objects, residential buildings, and private autos were damaged. That's coming from the press service of the Kyiv City Military Administration. We have some of the images coming out of Kyiv tonight. This is coming from Ilya Ponomarenko, an independent reporter there with Kiev Independent. That is the aftermath of that blast. You can see entire sections of this building just completely destroyed. And of course all the glass in the building completely blown out and cordoned off the area. This is the glass bridge in the heart of Kyiv.
только что ударила по мосту. Кличко не попало, там внизу воронка, вот запчасть от ракеты. Вот там есть повреждения моста, и там большая воронка внизу. Называется, встретил... У меня вчера был день рождения, думал, я сегодня еще отосплюсь. Но вот такие вот истории бывают. Ну...
Some of the injured. Most getting away with relatively light injuries from shrapnel. This is what the war looks like.
Так, мій контактний. Знімайте мені, будь ласка. Кому ще треба допомога?
Я не знаю, шукаю.
This is the reality. And I want to remind you that President Putin said in the address today that these were precision strikes carried out against critical infrastructure in Ukraine. Precision strikes. Look how precise it is. Precise enough to land a direct hit on top of a playground. Coming from the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Anton Jaroshenko. Meanwhile, the spirits of the Ukrainians did remain high, singing songs while taking shelter. Let's see here. We've had a couple of questions come in. Delta Aviation 23 asks, since Ukraine has HIMARS now, could that make a difference if Belarus invaded from the north? Yes, it would make a very significant difference in the war compared to what we saw back in March and April. It would be a huge difference in the combat capabilities of the Ukrainians. And it's not just the HIMARS and the M270s. It's a lot of other equipment that they've received. Also, really, your basic infantrymen in Ukraine is much better equipped now compared to what they were at the very beginning of the war, and that's where you're going to see much of the difference. It's the small differences in basic infantry and basic personal equipment that these guys are carrying that's going to have the biggest impact in the battlefield. While things like HIMARS certainly have a huge impact, HIMARS don't take and hold ground. The average infantryman does. Their armored forces do. Not HIMARS. HIMARS are a supporting asset, and they do an amazing job at that. And they will be able to do very effective strikes in the Ukrainian territory, but that's the reality of most of the basic equipment these guys are carrying are going to have a very much significant difference, and also the combat experience that Belarusian troops wouldn't have. Another comment we have coming in. Wasn't Lviv a major staging area for weapon systems brought in from NATO countries? Yes, Lviv is right there on the border with Poland, and it does facilitate logistical capabilities for both humanitarian aid as well as military facilitation as well. It's a major city. It's a strategic hub. That's very well known. However, as true as that may be, Russian missiles have an accuracy, precision missiles have an accuracy of anywhere from 300 to 500 meters on average. And these, you're not going to hit a depot with a 300 to 500 meter deviation on target. You might hit, a power plant that has 300 to 500 meters worth of stuff to hit, but an ammunition depot, not so much. They're not using precision strikes. They're using ordnance that's relatively outdated. And as we see, with Lviv itself, they didn't hit a military target. They didn't hit any of they hit civilians. And they hit about the only thing you could declare a valid military target infrastructure-wise is the critical infrastructure for electricity and running water. But even then, that's depriving civilians. So in that case, unless it's being inherently used for military purposes, which for the majority of Ukraine it's not, under the 1949 Geneva Convention and Protocol 1 of the Geneva Convention, which was adopted in 1977, it's not a valid military target unless it makes a big enough difference that it provides a strategic or tactical value in the war and a meaningful gain in the war effort. And that's under the Geneva Conventions. See someone already trying to rush ahead here, red arrow. But the German Foreign Ministry office was damaged in this strike. The building which is used by Germany for the German Foreign Ministry office to issue visas, it was actually damaged today during the missile strikes. However, the German Foreign Ministry actually posted on Twitter, and they stated that they released a statement saying that all of their personnel are safe and that they're all well. So that's good to see. This is coming from the German Foreign Office. They said a building in Kyiv, which also houses the German visa office, was damaged by rocket fire this morning. Since the beginning of Russia's war of aggression, these offices had not been used by our embassy. Our colleagues at the embassy in Kyiv are well. So they are all good, though their building was indeed hit. We also get a child casualty update coming out of Kyiv. Quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, 422 Ukrainian children have died, 804 children have been injured. Most victims among children are from the Donetsk region, and that's coming from the Prosecutor General's office in Ukraine. So we are seeing a steady increase in child casualties throughout the duration of this war, and unfortunately a lot of them are still on the front lines, and we are seeing that number continue to climb. This number does not include those which are reported missing, which is upwards of almost 300 at this point from the last update we had, and over almost 8,000 kids, about 7,800 of them in fact, have been forcefully deported to Russia, which under the Geneva Conventions in 1949, under the Rome Statute established alongside the ICC, constitutes a genocide against Ukraine under that definition of genocide and crimes against humanity. Damage report coming in from the governments here in Kyiv. Quote, as of 11 a.m., 11 important infrastructure facilities in 8 regions and Kyiv have been damaged. There is no electricity in some regions. That's coming from Denis Shmyhal, who is the Prime Minister of Ukraine. Russia launched 84 cruise missiles and 24 kamikaze drones all across Ukraine today, with an average total, according to Forbes, of that military hardware that was launched today equates to between $400 and $700 million USD. You can see this from United 24 Media. And also, of course, the Kyiv Independent. UN released several statements regarding today's attacks. First one we have coming in from the UN mission to Ukraine. It says the Secretary General is deeply shocked by today's large-scale missile attacks by the armed forces of the Russian Federation on cities across Ukraine that reportedly resulted in widespread damage to civilian areas and led to dozens of people being killed and injured. This constitutes another acceptable escalation of the war, and as always, civilians are paying the highest price. That's coming from the UN mission for Ukraine, the OCHA of the United Nations, which is leading that. The humanitarian coordinator for Ukraine stated, humanitarian aid will not stop. The United Nations and the entire humanitarian community are committed to staying and continuing our work to save lives and support people whose lives have been devastated by this war. And we'll go further on to say, I'm horrified by the wave of deadly attacks by the armed forces of the Russian Federation in Kyiv, Dnipro, Lviv, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, and other cities across the most regions of Ukraine this morning. And once again, that's coming from Humanitarian Coordinator for Ukraine, Denise Brown. Here, there is a sponsorship for Ukrainian farmers. USAID announced a partnership with Bayer to address the immediate and long-term demand for corn seed among Ukrainian farmers and other countries that depend on seed from Ukraine. Bayer is investing $35 million USD to boost Ukrainian agricultural processing capacity. And if you want more information, feel free. You can go check out the official link there for the USAID office. We move over here into Lyman, which was recently liberated. And at this point, there was a mass grave found in Lyman, as we have previously reported. The first 20 bodies have been exhumed of the victims found at these mass graves. These are victims that were killed during Russian occupation. At this point, they are believing that the gravesite is expected to exceed over 200 plus bodies at this point. So still a long way to go, but the first 20 have been exhumed. This is coming from the Defense Ministry of Ukraine on their official Twitter. And also from the Ministry of Internal Affairs, I believe. Yes. You get some photos of that exhumation process. Once again, if you couldn't already tell, this is not how wars are supposed to usually be fought. Not that they should be fought in the first place. But there's kind of a running theme here. And that is that civilians are dying in a rate that is inconceivable to think of, even on a perspective of collateral damage. There's a point in which, and I've said this before, and it's been a while since I said this, there comes a point in a war where you can just call it tragedy. Like, that's fine. Like, every war is a tragedy in and of its own right. A war shouldn't happen in the first place. It's a tragedy. But there comes a point where it's no longer a tragedy. Like, there comes a point where it's no longer just a tragedy. And this war has far exceeded that point. It's so far exceeded that point that it is insane to think about. It's missile attack upon missile attack upon missile attack on civilians. Just today, 84 cruise missiles in total, about 43 of which were shot down. But that still leaves about 40 missiles that reach their targets, about 41. Most of which, it landed in a playground in Shevchenko Park in downtown Kyiv. It hit the German embassy. Could you imagine if that was open? And we don't even have most of the updates from most of the rest of the country. Because the focus has been Lviv, Kyiv, and Zaporizhia. And Slavyansk. And Dnipro. It's just been, there's still entire sections of the country that we just don't have any information on right now. How many mass graves have been identified on Maxar satellite footage, has been found in person? How many torture chambers? How many looted items? How many deported children? How many killed children and injured children? How many cultural heritage sites, many of them being UNESCO heritage sites? How many medical facilities? We've even seen the International Committee of the Red Cross bombed. And aired it on this channel. So, there comes a point in which something is a tragedy. This is a genocide done very poorly. And even a genocide done very poorly is beyond, comprehension. But there is basically no part of the Geneva Convention that hasn't been broken by the Russian Federation. There is no point. And the craziest part about this is that the Russians advertise it. They advertise that they have children that they have taken from Ukraine and release statements from Moscow about them. They air on RIA News from 4K drone footage from a quadcopter hovering around Mariupol, them using incendiary munitions and a highly concentrated civilian population, breaking Protocol 3 of the Geneva Conventions. They, on live TV, announced that they conducted major strikes in major civilian population centers across the country, which breaks Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions, adopted in 1977. And also breaks the 1949 Geneva Conventions. The World Health Organization has verified that they have attacked hospitals. And how many have been damaged and destroyed. The WHO is confirming these. Confirming the deaths of the amount of people from these. And guess what? It's explicitly stated in pretty much every Geneva Convention since 1899 that medical facilities, both military and civilian, and all medical personnel are considered off limits for warfare, are considered non-combatants. They're hors de combat. Over and over, and how many looting, pillaging, protecting under the 1949 Geneva Convention. It's a war crime. It's so widespread we make memes about it. And the precedent is there. You have Chechnya, both the first and the second Chechen wars, the bombings of Grozny. You have Aleppo and Idlib. You have Raqqa in Syria. And I've heard so many arguments about the Syria one, too. Yes, the Russians are just indiscriminately bombing civilians in Syria. I will personally attest to that. And it just continues. We move over here into Slavyansk, which is our next point. Russian missile strikes were carried out on tremendous ferocity today, striking almost every major city throughout the country of Ukraine. Slavyansk was no exception. Right now, they're reporting 4 dead and 2 wounded after shelling overnight hit residential areas. One of the victims is reported to be a 12-year-old boy. There you go, coming out of Slavyansk.
Недобрий ранок у Слов'янську. На жаль, вночі місто знову обстріляли. Пряме влучення в будинок приватний. Сім'я загибла, але дитина, яка мешкала в будинку, вижила. Зруйновані будинки поруч. 2 поранених, 4 загиблих. Тримаємось, ми разом. Бережіть себе.
So this one's coming from Pavlo Korolenko. Pavlo Korolenko is the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration.
Я в час 05 встал, по нужде оправить нужду, и буквально через минуту, максимум 2, прилет. Ну и все, начали откапывать своих. А вот в доме напротив чудом мальчишка выжил, 9-11 лет. Ребенок жив, а остальные на части разорвало, по фрагментам собрали.
Но не собирались уезжать. Видно, что-то помешало.
От ракеты, что прилетело. Цемент поляков, горелый дым. Света нету, фонарика нету. Слышу голоса.
This is the National Police of Ukraine. Yeah. See, give you better context as to the situation. They used S-300 missiles that were converted to hit surface targets. The S-300 is an anti-air missile. It's a SAM missile, surface-to-air missile battery. And they converted a bunch of them because they're running out of actual purpose-built missile systems to hit ground targets. And they use them against Slavyansk. They're not very accurate. And they use them against Slavyansk. And that used to be a house. Killed everyone in it. Vaporized them, essentially. Used to be a house. Took a direct hit from an S-300 missile. Houses are not military targets. And according to Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions, and according to the 1949 Geneva Conventions, Are buildings being used certain for military purposes? Yes. However, if it is not without a proven reasonable doubt that that building is being used for military purposes, you cannot engage said building, and it must be assumed as still being a civilian utilized structure. Yes, the Geneva Conventions are that specific. If there is even if you suspect it of being used for military purposes, if there is any doubt that it could not be a military target, if there is any doubt that it is not being used by military forces at all, there's a single bit of doubt, you cannot attack it. You cannot engage it. Spelled out for you. International laws of war. You don't get to think on those things. Laws of war tell you. Kharkov was also shelled once again. They hit more residential areas. We do not have an update regarding casualties. Once again, Pavlik Krylenko showing us some of the damage. One of the Russian missiles was shot down using an Igla man-pad system, or man-portable air defense system, today. The Igla is a Russian development. It's a Soviet anti-air missile in response to the Stinger, which was introduced by the American forces and NATO forces. But once again, they shot 84 cruise missiles. Many of them were, about half of them were shot down today by Ukrainian air defense forces. One of them being with this. So we do have the video of the shoot down for you here. It appears to have been a Caliber cruise missile based off of what we're hearing in this.
Идет! Ваня, давай! Давай, сука, падай! Да, блядь! Да!
So that's one of the Russian missiles that were shot down today. Once again, only about half of them did reach their targets. Shortly after we got off the air on Saturday night, Zaporizhia was struck once again, and then it was struck again today. From that initial attack, 17 people were killed, and 40 so far have been declared wounded from that attack again on Sunday. This number is still expected to climb as they're still sifting through the debris of what's left of the apartment complex. In addition, more missiles struck it again today. That strike resulted in at least 3 deaths and 7 injuries, including 1 child. Quote, the Russian occupiers shelled the Zaporizhia region on October the 10th. 3 people were killed, 7 citizens were injured, including 1 child. The rescue operation is ongoing. And that's coming from Anatoly Kurtiev, the secretary of the Zaporizhia City Council. This is coming from right after we got off the air. Like, that entire building is just gone. That entire block is just gone. coming from the United Nations. People and supporters woke up today to see, once again, their loved ones killed and injured. A new attack killed many civilians while they were at home sleeping. The humanitarian community is outraged and sends our heartfelt condolences, coming from the humanitarian coordinator for Ukraine, Denise Brown. Once again, hashtag not a target. Security Services of Ukraine. I apologize for not being in the same mood I normally am when it comes to reporting on the news, but it's very difficult to report on this. Ervis asked regarding that missile shoot down, could that track the target like a javelin? Like the javelin? So, yes, manpads are specifically designed to shoot down targets like that. They're designed to shoot down aircraft, and also they can shoot down missiles. Manpads are able to do both. Makes them very, very effective. At least large cruise missiles, something that they can lock onto. The Javelin you have to manually lock on. These are a little bit more automated because of the speeds that these things are usually moving. They have to be. But the Javelin system requires a manual lock on. You have to manually acquire the target, and then you lock onto it. And then once the system basically saves the information that you lock onto and then fires to your target. That's kind of how it works, not going too descriptive because a lot of that is confidential. So I'm not going to disclose much more than that. However, the Javelin can shoot down certain aerial targets. As most notably, it can shoot down low-flying, slow helicopters is the best it can engage aerially. Realistically, you can engage other stuff if you are really good, but that is more or less the maximum what the gunner will train to do, gunnery wise when it comes to the Javelin. That's the most that a Javelin gunner will train in any capacity, and it's very minimal. To do anti-air wise. So it can be done, but it's not the same. These systems work in a very different capacity. The Javelin's mainly an anti-armor weapon. I mean, you could also use it you can use it in other capacities too, but the Javelin is an anti-armor weapon. Whereas the Stinger and the Iklas and the Strela are all anti-air weapons. And so there are different tools to the job. Or they're different tools for different jobs, and so it's not that they're good or bad against certain targets, but it's just that they are built to do different things. You can't walk into a house and renovate it with duct tape, and likewise, you can't repair your entire car with a hammer. Same kind of ideology. So Jumping up into Dnipro. Dnipro did not escape today's shelling. At least 4 people have been killed, with another 20 being wounded today. Quote, Russian occupiers shelled the Dniprovetsk region on October the 10th. 4 people were killed, 19 citizens were injured. Local residential buildings, critical infrastructure objects, and public transport stops were damaged. That's coming from Valentin Reznichenko, who's the head of the Dniprovetsk Regional Military Administration. You can see here some of the photos of the damage here. That's not telling. I don't know what is. Fierce fighting does continue down in Kherson. Despite today's events, they do continue to sweep through Russian lines, and they continue to be they've been continuing to roll this right flank on the Russians here. And we do see some of the combat footage coming out of the Kherson region today.
Что там? Опа! Ваши комментарии? Охуенно! Ай, нахуй! Что там?
Воха, воха, я малеш, задня, права, там наші, прийом.
Германия, воха, прийом. Скажіть, що повні конституційні загон. Наше загон, наше нема що. Повтори. Як прикачать вогонь, там де нас танчик стояв. Твої посадки, там же нема що. Розсуяли. Це кому передати?
Це цей дебіл знову бачить.
Це наш танчик стояв, там півки, блядь. Там прикачать вогонь, все. Я прийняв тебе. Там же лишні, блядь, лишні вас освітить. Хуяю.
Ебать, як довго там. О, красава!
So that's reportedly a Russian, or sorry, a Ukrainian tank picking off a convoy of Russian vehicles. And there she goes afterwards. So, George Smulovich sorry if I butcher your name. Gerard Smolovich asks, understanding that the escalation ship is already sailing, what should Ukraine and NATO do? Finish off the Kerch Bridge with another strike and cut off Crimea altogether? Well, that can be a very difficult question. The escalation ship hasn't entirely sailed because it's not a full-blown world war yet. So that's definitely still something that could happen, not to stoke fears or anything, but that's obviously this conflict is really drawing in a lot of countries and is really putting two large nuclear powers really kind of head to head right now. And this isn't something that's like a one-off thing either. This has been growing for some time. But there's still more escalation that could happen. And I mean, we haven't seen nuclear strikes or anything carried out, but what could Ukraine and NATO do? Well, Ukraine and NATO could technically do a lot. It doesn't, but the reasonable feasibility of it. Just because in a war you want to do something doesn't necessarily mean you get to do something. Ukraine appears to have gotten their ability to have destroyed, part of the Kerch Bridge, limiting its capacity. We've seen video footage up close and personal of the rail system on the Kerch Bridge. It does not look like the rail system is getting fixed anytime soon. They seem to be completely warped. The beams do, and so it will take some extensive repairs to get that back up and running. It will get back up and running. It will likely take some time. And time is valuable. Time is a commodity that a lot of times on the battlefield you don't have. On the battlefield, things are determined in seconds. Meanwhile, repairs on rail facilities are measured in hours, if not days and weeks. Likewise, for the rest of the Kerch Bridge, that now limits road capacity as it's really just one way now. So it really bottlenecks, plus the fleeing Russians out of Crimea that were on vacation. They're fleeing now. And because the war once again has come to them and they don't want to be separated from Russia, they're trying to get back. And so that creates a bottleneck of refugees that only slows down the capacity to really get vehicles through for reinforcements and supplies and everything, which just hinders the Russian logistical lines even more so. And really in ship-bearing capacity, the ferries, they are operational, but it's very limited. I mean, that's limited capacity, and it takes a lot longer than just driving across the bridge, because you have to load, you have to depart, you have to port, you have to make the port call on the other side, you have to disembark everything. That takes valuable time, and is it worth it? Is it not? And they're also ferrying civilians too, so you still run into that civilian bottleneck. And yes, could they technically do it again? I am sure they could. However, the whole eyes of the world are now on the Kerch Bridge. Not exactly the most opportune time to blow up the rest of the bridge. You don't want everyone, focused on this one thing and then try and do a covert operation when everyone in the world is watching you, especially your enemy. So would blowing up the Kerch Bridge be optimal and completely collapsing it? Yes. Is it likely to happen anytime soon? No. Not without the proper ordnance. And not without the proper capabilities. And I don't think Ukraine, not to say they don't have the capability, because they did it once, they can do it again, but a lot of it's about timing, and timing just isn't there right now. They hit it once. They really crippled it, did significant damage to it. It buys them time. That stuff can be repaired over time, but it's not going to be perfect. It's going to take some time to do the repairs, and in the meantime, you're really limiting the Russian logistical capability, even if it's a few hours, if not days, which makes a huge difference on the battle space. Other things they could do, Ukraine could continue to roll up the Russian flank, really taking out the rest of the Dnipro River, just north of the Dnipro River, and capturing the rest of Kherson, including Kherson. That's a huge political and symbolic thing for the Ukrainians, retaking Kherson, the only regional city or the regional capital captured throughout the duration of the war. That's a very symbolic thing and can be done. And this also means that you free up a lot of Ukrainian troops if you successfully capture, north of the Dnieper River. Realistically, you don't have to keep pushing across the river and continue pushing towards Crimea at that point. It's a really good stopping point. The Dnieper River is very difficult to pontoon across, meaning any major offensives cannot take place across the Dnieper River. And so it makes it very easy. You can use a very minimal amount of forces, considering all of the major bridgeheads are already cut off. You can use a very minimal amount of forces to continue to defend and just mop up any kind of ferry crossings or minor incursions by Russian forces that may occur with very limited number of troops. And that frees up a large quantity of Ukrainian forces that can now be transferred. Saying once this has been liberated. Ukraine can now transfer a majority of the forces they have there somewhere else, whether that's down here near Zaporizhia and make a drive towards Mariupol and Melitopol, or whether you're talking about up in the Kharkiv and sweep across and continue to sweep along the flank, pushing into the Luhansk Oblast and finally down into the Donetsk. I think the best, in my personal game plan opinion, which doesn't account for a whole lot because I was a corporal, I wasn't like a 4-star general in the Marine Corps, okay? So take it with a huge grain of salt. In my opinion, based off of what I see and what knowledge I have of the situation, which is very minimal, very minimal. That's what I would do. I would push them into Dnipro, transfer my forces, combine my forces. I would sweep them on their flank and basically close the door on them, quite literally. Swinging this entire flank into Crimea and then sweeping down through Crimea because it bottlenecks them at the Kerch bridge. And then you either kill, capture, or these troops abandon everything they have. Huge gain in surplus for your equipment. But also it's a huge demoralizing factor that Russia really can't come back from because they can't simply just retreat. Because they don't have a way to retreat, and it's a bottleneck, so it's going to be every man for themselves if they get to that point. This part of the Kherson Oblast and through Crimea, until you get into these little bit more mountainous regions in the Crimean Peninsula, very open, flat terrain that is not very defensible. So it would make it very difficult for the Russians to really do anything to counteract an offensive in that area. There's no good defensible positions for them to really, stop the tide of Ukrainian forces once they get to this area. It's really just a open fields, wide open spaces of Ukraine that is perfect for supporting fires and artillery and wide-scale maneuver. Whereas over here, there's a little bit better defensible positions just because of the makeup of the landscape. So that's what I would do. But once again, I have essentially next to no knowledge on the actual situation as to where the massive concentrations of Russian troops are. General ideas, I can tell you, they're probably over here by Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, and Luhansk, Alchevsk, Krylivka, and over by Donetsk right now, with a string of defensive positions here in the Zaporizhia area, kind of moving from Vuhledar over the way over to by Vasilivka. Another concentration of forces over by Enerhodar, with a large concentration of forces over by the Kherson area, and obviously supporting assets coming out of Crimea. So, as well as up by like Kursk and Belgorod, and Rostov-on-Don has turned into a huge supply hub as well. So that's kind of my understanding of the tactical situation there on the ground. The strategic situation on the ground is probably better stated. But that's kind of what I see Ukraine being able to do. And none of that requires support, or none of that requires direct military involvement from NATO. And as for what NATO could do, continuing to train Ukrainian forces, and intelligence as well, and advise and assist. Advise and assist in the aspect of strategic planning, wargaming, that kind of thing. So Gerard then goes on to ask, do you know what's the warning time for cruise missiles launched from aircraft? And can't NATO, U.S., Ice and Sky see that those launches maybe? Well, I think the testament to detection of missile launches, because it's something that the United States can detect and our aircraft can detect. And we have, it's not just these aircraft launched missiles. It's not just these cruise, it's not just these aircraft that are circling that you see all the time on Flight Radar 24. Because most of aircraft, especially NATO aircraft right now, are operating transponders off, and Flight Radar 24 requires a aircraft to have its transponder on, to basically broadcast to the world that it's there. So we've seen them switch the transponders off, telling us that they're probably operating in a much quieter capacity and probably flying longer and probably more missions as well. But I can almost guarantee you that there's also radars that are ground-based radar that aren't just located at bases, but other areas throughout places in, like, say, Poland and Slovakia, Hungary, NATO countries here along the border that can also detect impacts. And that's one of the things that we did during the Battle of Kasham down here in Deir ez-Zor is we went down, left our fob, and we went down and we set up with HIMARS as part of the QRF force there, and they set up a HIMARS radar. We stopped and they set up a HIMARS radar that allowed us to detect the impacts that were occurring down here near the main battle space where the actual fight was ongoing. So I know that we have that capability, and it definitely could be used. Now, could they detect those launches in time? Well, I think they already are, considering the effectiveness. While it may be terrible that 40 missiles still made it to their targets, over half of the missiles fired did not reach their targets, which is an indicator that they are detecting these missiles. However, there comes a point in which it's too many. And your air defenses just can't do enough. And we see guys are shooting them down with man-pads. You're hearing anti-aircraft gunfire missile launches from anti-aircraft systems. He has the S-300 batteries they're firing. You have all of those defense batteries that are being sent by NATO allies, and all of those inherent to Ukraine. I mean, today they were really putting in overtime. And Russia can't sustain launches like that. They don't have the military capability to do that and maintain a stockpile in case a war does end up breaking out with, say, with NATO, or maybe not even NATO, but just a general coalition of other countries, should that come to that point. They just don't have that capability to sustain that kind of attack. Today was more of it was just quantity. It's kind of like a swarm drone attack, if that makes sense. Yeah. Aravis says, I think it's pretty stunning, considering that they don't have Israel's Iron Dome defense, which intercepts, 90% of the incoming missiles. Yes. Israel's Iron Dome defense is considered the best air defense system in the world. However, they really wouldn't have that much effectiveness with it, even if they did have it, because Israel is a lot smaller area to cover than Ukraine. So, I mean, you can only prevent so much. You can only intercept so many things. And there comes a point in which, once again, it's just too much. Especially over that large of an area, the Iron Dome defense system just wouldn't work. It's just too large of an area. We jump over here. 17 missiles were downed in total between Mykolaiv and Odessa region. Quote on October the 10th, Ukrainian Air Defense Forces shot down 14 Russian missiles in the Mykolaiv region and 3 missiles in the Odessa region. That's coming from Operational Command South. And out of Odessa, on 10/9, 13 ships carrying over 230,000 tons of agricultural products left Odessa ports and headed to countries in Africa, Asia, and Europe. 305 ships exported 6.8 million tons of Ukrainian food ever since the grain corridor opened. You can see some of those ships getting ready to leave port here. So we're still seeing quite an immense amount of grain leaving through the grain corridor, which is amazing. And that's going to free up a lot of resources for the world and put some stability back into the global markets, which will bring some of those prices down. And also, of course, humanitarian efforts, which are ongoing throughout the world. That's actually everything inside of Ukraine. But don't worry, there's plenty of other stuff outside of Ukraine, too. And we actually start off up here in Belarus, which we haven't heard from in a long time. It's been a while since we had a point up in Belarus. But coming out of Orsha, which is in Belarus here, along the Russian and Belarusian border, we're seeing a large quantity of T-Series tanks, mostly T-72s, that were spotted being flatbedded on rail car through Orsha, Belarus. This comes as Belarus may be entering the war in Ukraine directly. And that is something that we're hearing. There's unconfirmed reports, once again, for those that may just not be listening. There are unconfirmed reports that large numbers of Russian conscripts have arrived in the country of Belarus. They aren't very well equipped outside of just having uniforms, reportedly. But once again, unconfirmed reports of Russian troops entering into Belarus. We're also seeing large equipment movements near the Belarusian and Russian border. That could signal that this is either Belarusian or Russian equipment, as it is a T-Series model tank, which is heavily utilized by both of these powers. And it is a possibility, and something that Lukashenko has been hinting at, the possibility that Belarus, which is in a union with Russia, with the point of actually at some point combining back into one country, that they are indeed looking at possibly going into direct conflict with Ukraine after previously being used as a staging ground for military operations in Ukraine at the beginning of the war, prior to the Russians losing the battle in the north. So we could see the possibility of a second front opening once again here in the northern part of Ukraine by Belarus and Russian forces attempting to drive from the north once again, opening a second front and alleviating pressure from forces there in the east and in the south. However, once again, it should be noted that there are troops, there are Ukrainian forces that are staged in the north for this possibility. So it does not mean that Ukraine is completely defenseless in its north. They have withheld troop reserves for this purpose here in the north. They do have divisions in the north specifically to prevent and or counter any assault from the north after the ending of those offensive operations by Russia. But anyway, take a look at this equipment coming through Orsha, Belarus. We can see that these appear to be T-72 tanks. You can tell based off of the road wheels. You can also tell based off of their snorkeling gear design. Snorkeling gear, which is hinted out that's what these little small round things on the back are. These are snorkeling gear. It means that these can actually ford through water. Supposed to be able to. I don't know how much I would trust that on a Russian tank, but these are T-72s. You can also tell it by the road wheel design. It has a milled road wheel system there. It's an unsupported suspension, but very, very iconic design. And we can see troops. Once again, unconfirmed reports, but we can see troops in cattle cars, in cargo cars as well. Once again, coming from Orsha, Belarus, right here on the Belarusian and Russian border. So once again, a possible second offensive could open up at some point. Over here in Russia, we do know that over here, this is in the Morozovsk area. This is the Morozovsk Air Base, which is located here. And an Su-24, which is actually originally stationed out in the eastern part of Russia, the far eastern part of Russia, has appeared here in the Rostov Oblast. This one apparently crashed shortly upon takeoff. Second or third time at this point that we've seen this instance. But it did crash out here in the field over here in the Rostov Oblast near the airbase. We got some very nice photos of this Su-24M. Coming from this airbase. And up in Kaliningrad, also now part of Czechia, if you're following that movement. Yes, Kaliningrad should belong to Czechia. At least 2 people are dead after a tourist bus and a Kamaz crashed. 1 person died and 6 were hospitalized after a head-on collision between a tourist bus and a Kamaz in the Kaliningrad region. As a result of the accident, the truck overturned into a ditch and caught fire. According to the main director of the Ministry of Emergency Situations for Russia, for the region, there were 14 passengers and 2 drivers on the bus. One of them was crushed by the Kamaz. The circumstances behind the fatal accident are still being established. 7 cars also collided in the Voronezh region. As a result, 1 person died and 7 others were injured. You can see what's left of that bus. Oof. You can see what happened after that collision there in the Voronezh region. Take a look at the rest of Europe and what's going on. Germany says that Germany will transfer 11 million euros worth of winter equipment to Ukraine. After corresponding request from Ukrainian leadership, Berlin wants to deliver equipment for the approaching winter and the total of 11 million euros as quickly as possible. The package includes 100,000 warm jackets and other winter clothing, 100 heated tents, as well as hundreds of mobile power generators and food kits. It's not the only thing. Germany to quickly send air defense systems to Ukraine. German Defense Minister Christine Lambrecht on Monday said Russian missiles on Ukrainian population centers highlighted the urgency of delivering air defense systems to Kyiv forces. The long-promised systems, which are capable of protecting an entire city, were originally slated to be delivered at the end of the year. Monday's daily strikes, however, have now sped up the delivery time. So this is some of the air defense systems that they are supposed to be receiving. This is coming from the Bundeswehr. Now, once again, they're only an hour late. Geneva, over here at the World Health Organization. Today, for those that don't know, is World Mental Health Day. And close to 1 billion people have a mental health disorder. 1 in 7 children and adolescents globally live with a mental health condition. The COVID-19 pandemic triggered a 25% increase in the prevalence of anxiety and depression worldwide. Growing social and economic inequalities, protracted conflicts, violence, and public health emergencies affect whole populations, threatening progress towards improved well-being. 84 million people worldwide were forcibly displaced during 2021. The WHO is calling on making mental health and well-being for all a global priority. WHO has dedicated a long, comprehensive thread, including some helpful tips and information. So you take a look here. So this is coming from the World Health Organization.
I think it was 11 when my parents divorced. I got so affected. The trauma just kept accumulating.
I ended up being diagnosed with moderate to severe depression. I went through a roller coaster of emotions, from fear and anger to having uncontrollable tears any time of the day or night.
I had sexual abuse in my family for a long time, and I didn't remember it. It was pushed away. I was in depression.
I saw a psychiatrist and then they recommended me to a psychotherapist. Started having joy again in life, and so I connected with people who have been through stuff.
In March this year, I started work at a college in Yellowknife. It felt like my world was growing again.
I was trying to get a therapist. That was the turning point for me, to have a place that I can talk.
I have a community, I call it a support system. And so that is really how gradually I was able to pick myself up.
It's okay not to be okay, and it's okay to ask for help.
This life have a meaning for me because I did something for myself.
So that's coming from the World Health Organization, and once again, they did put a bit of stuff together here for this. So they said, here's how you can help. Encourage regular eating, sleeping, and exercise. Help them focus on the positive rather than the negative. And be patient. Recovery can take time. Remember, in order to support others, you need to take care of yourself too. Coming from the journal UN regarding that. So, very good to see that coming out of the World Health Organization. It's a very important message. Yeah, do seek help. I mean, it's okay. I have personal problems. I know a lot of people on the team have problems as well that everyone is sorting through and needs help with every once in a while. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of personal experience with what happens when people don't seek help, and it deeply affects everyone every day. So I always encourage you, please go and get some help. Always get some help, and it's not a bad thing, really isn't. I'm really happy for the support I've gotten and continue to get, and always welcome supporting others as well. Down in Istanbul, a powerful explosion rocked Istanbul in the evening of October the 9th. The powerful explosion thundered in Istanbul. A fire started in one of the buildings. It's known that 3 people became victims of the explosion. So far, the reason for the situation has not been reported, but according to one version, it was a gas explosion.
Hocam bütün çatı gitti be.
As we move down here and into Syria, we have a couple of different developments. Out of Al-Bab, citywide strikes are taking place after an activist was killed. The murder of an activist sparked riots in liberated areas of Syria. The killing of a prominent Syrian opposition activist who sparked anger in the Turkish-controlled northwestern city of Al-Bab. Meanwhile, mourners demand justice and an end to the corrupt rule of the city. Mohammed Abdul Latif, also known locally as Abu Ghanum, was fatally shot along with his pregnant wife by unidentified assailants on Friday evening. The citywide strike on Saturday as thousands of people joined the funeral of an activist whose body was covered in the flag of the Syrian revolution he had long supported. So another casualty of the war there in Syria. Over here, an Islamic State field commander was killed in northern Syria. A UAV killed one person. The incident occurred near the settlement Tel Abyad in the province of Raqqa. The drone reportedly fired at least 3 missiles at a man riding a motorcycle. He died on the spot from his injuries. According to preliminary data, the deceased was called Ammar Ali Al-Yaya, and he was the field commander of the Islamic State. Jump over here into Iran, where riots do continue. Thousands of people took to the streets of the country's cities today here in Iran. The demonstrators shouted slogans against the supreme leader Ali Khamenei, and called for a revolution. Security forces tried to disperse the protesters, but they resisted and got into a fight with police. In the city of Sanandaj, there was a record. It was recorded how a distraught crowd tried to stone a law enforcement officer with stones. In a number of other settlements among protesters, there were provocateurs who opened fire in the direction of security forces, forcing them to open fire in return. Authorities said 24 law enforcement officers were killed and more than 2,000 were injured. There's no official data on the deaths among the demonstrators. According to observers, the number of killed exceeds 180 people. Hundreds were injured and several thousand provocateurs and activists and active protesters were detained. Tehran apparently still wants to get by with little bloodshed without using the security forces in full to suppress the unrest. Nevertheless, if the situation in Iran gets out of control, not without the help of other interested forces, it is possible that this will give the government a free hand to use forceful scenario of solving the problem. And in Tehran, as part of those protests, the Iranian national news outlet was hacked. The live broadcaster showed the Ayatollah in flames with his image crossed out, as well as photographs of women killed during the current protests.
نادر مهدوی که چند بار اسمش رو اینجا آوردید آقایون، کسی از دوستان ما که وارد در این موضوعات میگو اگر این نادر مهدوی
خب بینندگان عزیز، دعوت میکنم به ادامه خبرها توجه بفرمایید. معاون تجارت و
So, needless to say, people in Iran are not very happy, and I don't exactly blame them. So, it looks like, once again, we could be seeing the very beginning of a second revolution there in Iran. First one since 1979, I believe. Up here in northern Afghanistan, Taliban forces forced people from their homes. The armed Taliban continue to expel local Tajiks and Uzbeks from their homes in the Khawaja Buadin district of the Kar province. On October the 7th, in one of the villages, about 100 Tajik and Uzbek families were forced to leave their homes, which they are now inhabited by Kushi nomads and immigrants of the Pakistani Waziristan. As a sign of seriousness of their threats and as a symbol of their power, the Taliban invaders, IDPs say, hang dogs on fences that belong to the Tajik and Uzbek families being expelled. Takhar is now becoming one of the main areas of ethnic cleansing in Afghanistan, and as a result, which representatives of non-Pashtun peoples are expelled from their homes. We can see some of these photos of them expelling individuals from their homes. So it would appear that possible ethnic cleansing, or more than likely, ethnic cleansing taking place up here in northern Afghanistan. Coming out of Islamabad, a large fire occurred there at a mall there in Islamabad, specifically the Centaurus Mall at the center of the Pakistani capital. Police say that everyone in the shopping center was evacuated safely and with no casualties. The fire broke out at lunchtime with footage showing roaring flames near the food court while it was packed with visitors. The Capital Development Authority, or CDA, said the fire went out of control was under control after about 2 hours. We can see that the mall fire here from above. Luckily, there appears to have been no casualties, so very, very good to hear that. Heavy rain has killed at least 9 people here in the Uttar Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh area of India. 9 people killed in a rain-related incidents in UP. Schools in several districts remain closed on Monday. In Gorakhpur, 2 persons were killed when a boat capsized in the Rapti River. In Ghaziabad, a 90-year-old woman was killed after a house collapsed due to rains. 2 farmers in Hardoi, a 24-year-old of Rampur Mishra village, an 11-year-old from Sitapur district, a 75-year-old from Jaunpur, were all killed after being hit by lightning. A 14-year-old boy was killed after a house collapsed due to heavy rains. So quite heavy rains there in this region of India, in the Uttar Pradesh, and hopefully we'll get some more developments on that situation here in the coming future. But if you want to read a little bit more into it, feel free to check out the Times of India if you would like there, who has an article regarding this. You jump over here and into the Tigray region of Ethiopia, where 90% of people in the Tigray region require humanitarian aid just to survive. Unfortunately, ongoing Eritrean assaults and dire humanitarian aid needs really plague this region at this point. Both Ethiopia and Eritrea, to its neighbor to the north, are attacking these individuals here in the Tigray region as the conflict has kind of been brought back up from a relatively calm situation that was still kind of dire humanitarian aid, though, to a situation where humanitarian aid is almost impossible. To include reports of, and this is coming from the United Nations, reports of ethnic cleansing within these regions by Ethiopian and Eritrean forces. The Tigray authorities accused Eritrean and Ethiopian forces of the full-scale assault on 10/9 in Rama, Zalambasa, and Sirona. On October the 7th, 2022, an airstrike hit a home in Debre Kerbe, or Zana, killing a mother and severely injuring her 2 children. It also injured other people and destroyed houses and property. 7 million people in Tigray have been under siege and in communications blackout for 705 days without access to mental health services in an emergency. Local physicians are pleading with the world to act. This is Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, who is actually the head of the World Health Organization. The WHO urgently needs safe and sustainable access to deliver essential medicines and medical equipment to Tigray, Ethiopia. As Dr. Fasiha Mdalasi said, patients do not have time to wait. So that is the situation there in the Tigray region of Ethiopia. It is quite a dire situation. We have been seeing that situation only deteriorate over the past few months. Jump over the Atlantic over here into Venezuela, where landslides and flash floods have killed 25 people. Heavy rain led to a landslide in Las Tierras, Aragua, and that destroyed and dragged away houses, trees, and vehicles, leaving 25. CGTN is reporting 36 dead. And 50 plus, or CGTN is reporting 56 missing on Saturday, or 10/8. A dam in the Los Horios that overflowed and joined the flow of the Los Patos Creek during the past week. Torrential rains have caused flooding in 11 of Venezuela's 23 states. This is coming from Los Horios. This is the heavy rainfall.
Ahí estamos, ahí estamos. Vamos, mira todo lo que se trae esa mierda, huevo, mira el carro, mira el carro, marico, nada, huevo, nada, estamos. Mira cómo estamos nosotros aquí, huevo. Mierda. Mira, vámonos para abajo, vámonos para abajo. Dios.
So there are those instances and many more which are coming out of Venezuela as they deal with that situation. Up here in Washington, the United States will provide Ukraine with modern air defense systems. U.S. President Joe Biden pledged to Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky on Monday that the United States will provide Ukraine with advanced air systems that after a devastating missile barrage from Russia. Biden also told Zelensky that the United States and its allies and partners would continue imposing costs on Russia, holding Russia accountable for its war crimes and atrocities, and providing Ukraine with security, economic, and humanitarian assistance. This is coming from the official statement coming from the White House. The Abrams X was debuted. The newest Abrams main battle tank design debuted at AUSA 2022. It appears to have many upgraded features which are meant to improve combat capability and increase survivability. And the first one we can take a look at here. So that is the photo of the Abrams X, the newest in this Abrams series of main battle tanks. I will go through that a little bit more here in the future. Here's a video of the system. Okay. So, this piqued my interest, and I spent quite a considerable amount of time looking at these tanks, or looking at this tank, because there's one tank I have to be familiar with. It's going to be the T-72 and this. So the Abrams tank, because I've operated with them before. And I know the Abrams pretty well. As an anti-tank missileman, you are expected to know not just enemy vehicles, but of course also friendly vehicles, because other countries use the Abrams too. So we'll start here. So, couple of interesting things that, as someone who does have expertise in this field, I would like to kind of point out as to my observations of the system. So, uses the same standard basic support system of the treads on the vehicle itself here. Standard tread lines, standard, it's the exact same, appears to be the exact same suspension setup on the system itself. Some minor differences in there. I'm sure there's some additional weight to the tank. The first thing we have here is that there is no bore evacuator. Let's see. I'm going to bring up a picture of an Abrams tank here for you so you can see exactly what I mean. Perfect. So, this is an Abrams main battle tank. This is the M1A2 Abrams. Okay? Now, this right here, this little bulge thing right there, that right there is what is called a bore evacuator. It's a non-concentric bore evacuator, usually mid or rear of mid of center line on the barrel. It's a very distinct thing of the tanks for like the Abrams and other NATO-style vehicles. There is no bore evacuator on this. As you can see here, this appears to have it has a barrel sleeve here, and I'm not quite sure how it's evacuating the gases out of this barrel. It also has a very, very different muzzle to the end of this tank. So it has a very different muzzle. It appears to have a very large, very, very iconic muzzle brake, and you can see that it has a laser system there that probably a gyroscope basically on the barrel that allows the barrel to stay on target while it's moving, to keep it relatively on target. Makes sense. Very common on main battle tanks. Has coaxial 7.62mm machine gun. You can see the port for it right there. Standard procedure with these vehicles. Has a very interesting light setup. You can see the lights built here onto the front of the on top of the upper glacis of the armor here on the Abrams tank. It's built into the glacis frontal paint on the upper glacis frontal plate here on the front of the tank, and built in right there. You can see the different light systems it has. You can also see that it has multiple hatches underneath the tank turret, whereas the Abrams only has the driver's position. You have multiple hatches here. That's because reportedly it is a crewless turret. It requires only 3-man crews as opposed to 4, and it's a fully automated turret system. It has no crew in the turret. The entire crew capsule is located within the belly of the vehicle, inside of its own armored compartment. It has a double set of armor. Think of it like like the Citadel on a capital ship. In a fleet or something, as an internal armor belt just specifically for the crew capsule that's built behind the upper and lower glacis, which is the thickest armor of the tank, and has the most distinct angular patterns on it for deflection. So that's what we're seeing here on the front of the tank. Something else I want to... So these optical pieces are very distinct of the Challenger system, and also to an extent of the Leclerc, which is a French main battle tank. These optical systems, these are how they're going to be looking at. This is how they're going to be looking out of the vehicle in a lot of ways. Now, I don't know the extent of what system suites that they have in this. I'm obviously going to guess and say they probably have thermal vision, infrared, as well as or IR systems, as well as night vision systems in this, as well as probably laser range finding. Now, the big thing on the top, that is a huge CROWS system. So a CROWS system is an automated gun system that even American vehicles use nowadays. And we use them in Syria. They're really cool, but they're really not so great on situational awareness. But they make the weapon system a lot more accurate. Technically, they don't, but they do if you've ever actually employed it. That makes it a lot more accurate at range. Something else that's been swapped out. So the reason why guns are fixed on the top of a turret on a tank is because these are considered anti-aircraft guns. Believe it or not, the 50 cal and the M240 Golf on top of these vehicles is considered a anti-aircraft system because tanks are very vulnerable to aircraft. Now this one has what my best guess is, and I please don't quote me on this one. I believe that is an upgraded version of the Mark 20 Rheinmetall 20mm auto cannon in a Crow system. Probably has, I'm going to guess and say, because 50 cal, you can load about 400 rounds into a Crow system for a 50 cal. Being 20mm, I'm going to guess and say probably about 200 rounds. But this appears to be an upgraded version of the Mark 20 Rhein. It's produced by a German arms company that also builds the main guns for the Abrams, called the Rheinmetall. They also produce a lot of other weaponry, including for the Leopard main battle tanks. The larger section here, I believe this main gun is actually 125 millimeters as opposed to 120 millimeter. And I believe this kind of style of barrel kind of shows, usually you see this style of barrel with a rifled barrel as opposed to a smoothbore. The current barrel for a Abrams tank is a smoothbore 120 millimeter Rheinmetall gun. What you see on this, I believe, is 125 millimeters, possibly. Don't quote me. I'm making observations here. I believe it's a 125 millimeter main gun. That I'm going to guess and say is actually rifled, which would increase accuracy and range on these. However, it does make it a little bit more difficult for maintenance. All right. What else can we get? Okay, side skirts. Obviously has a side skirt armor. These are going to be composite armor schemes on any of these modern tanks, which means that these are actually more durable than steel is, because most older tanks, the T-72, T-62, T-64, T-55, T-54, and most other tanks, T-76 for instance, Type 85 TAC-3, which is Chinese, those usually use either a moderate composite armor or use the old-fashioned style of cold-rolled homogeneous steel, which is actually that's the same kind of steel that you would have seen used on Sherman tanks, the IS-2, IS-3, T-34. These ones are going to use kind of a composite. It kind of mixes steel and ceramic together with that's the basic idea. That's a very dumbed down explanation because even I don't know the armor composite of an Abrams tank, way above my pay grade. But these things are usually much lighter than steel, and they're also much tougher than steel, meaning, and when added with the deflection angles, you actually have a better survivability than just rolled cold homogeneous steel or even moderate composite makeups, say, such as the T90 and T80. But these side skirts you see back here, you can't see actually the drive wheel on this, which is that kind of hooked wheel that you see on the backs of tanks. You don't see it here. On the M1A1A2 Abrams, you can see there was actually a cutout for the drive wheel in the rear because of the extra space required for it. This tank, actually, with its armor setup, not only has better coverage of the road wheel setup, which minimizes the ability for a mobility kill on the vehicles themselves. So RPGs and stuff like that, they can't accurately get a mobility kill on this thing because it's much better protected here, as well as the drive sprocket is much better protected because it has plate armor on the sides. You can see it has a built-in smoke dispensing system. These can also dispense flares and other things, whatever you want to put in there. You can see it has an entire suite. These probably include weather gauges, probably detection systems for lasers, which is a thing that they can do. It can also include anti-armor systems inside of it, laser rangefinders, GPS, satellite communications, HF, UHF radio frequencies. Yeah. So that's this section. That's a pretty cool barrel, though. And if it's a 125 millimeter main gun, that's really nice. But it's supposed to be completely automated in the turret. So think T90, but obviously we're probably building this a little bit better considering the design flaws that had. So now, we go over to this video. let's take a look at the walk around here. So you can see that's the light system in the front. Same things we just talked about. He does a walk around. Same milled, probably supported suspension system. I do not know what that is. I don't know if that's actually an extra viewing port to be able to see out the shoulder of the vehicle, or if this is a camera area so that the way the crew member, the driver, can see out the corner of the vehicle and have a better field of view. Or this may actually, I doubt this is an auxiliary exhaust system, but it's quite possible. You can see better here the smoke dischargers, and I believe that's even actually a viewing port here in the side. Based off of the reflective materials there, it looks like it's actually a viewing port from inside the turret should a gunner need to be in there. Because these are still going to, they're redundancies, there's going to be a backup. You can see better here, the drive sprocket is actually covered on the main battle tank. And we can see that there's that concave here in the back for the lip. You can see that there is no extra paneling on the outside to allow for, you can see like these have cages where you can hook additional equipment and materials on the back. These do not have that. It has internal compartment storage. This has a latch right there, so you can bet that I do not believe that this is actually the ammo stowage in the back. And then you can get a better look at some of those electronic suites. That looks like it's actually a radio antenna that they have back there, probably UHF, because it's a short antenna. And then coming around the back, you still have that dual exhaust, which tells you that this thing still uses the twin turbine jet engines. The exhaust coming out the back of an Abrams tank is actually 600 degrees Fahrenheit, and they still have a grunt phone, which means that grunts can still run up to it. They can open up that phone and they can talk directly to the crew inside to direct coordinated fires when using combined arms. Once again, do not envy the guy running up to the back of this thing. This is 600 degrees coming out the back because it's a twin jet turbo engine. These engines literally go into jet fighters. It's the same type of engine that goes into a jet fighter. These things, just to start the engines on an Abrams tank, require 10 gallons of JP8 diesel fuel. Just to start the engines, it takes 10 gallons of fuel. So that is what I'm saying. Ooh. So right here. Oh. So what you see here, this right there, I believe what that is actually an anti-IED. So yes, it's 600 degrees Fahrenheit coming out the back of that, for as I was saying. But this right here, in the back, that is actually, that I believe is an anti-IED suite. What it does is it jams radio frequencies that doesn't allow for people to use like cell phones to remotely detonate an IED. It usually jams electronic signals within the area, which is something that we use on Humvees and other equipment. But this one seems to be a much smaller system, indicating it's probably just a newer development than the giant ones that we had on the Humvees and on the MRAPs and stuff. But that might be it, or it could also be, it reminds me a lot of the wind sensors and the weather sensors that are on top of a T90. So it's possible that it could be that suite as well. But these are all assumptions and observations I'm making based off of this tank. It doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And I could be wrong on some of this stuff, but that's just my observations from one photo and one short video of one side of this tank, and comparing it with the M1A1 and M1A2 Abrams main battle tanks. So there you go. If anyone has any kind of interest in any of this, which I'm sure someone does, but if anyone has any interest, that is my thoughts on the M1A1A2 main battle tank. Now some of the things that are kind of up for debate, the type of 20mm main gun, the type of optic suites, like on this back, the weather sensors and the anti-IED suites and stuff like that. Some of the portholes, possible portholes, or that are sensors. And if it's 120 versus 125mm main gun, I heard that they were upgrading the main gun anyway, so that's kind of why I'm leaning to 125, because 130mm wouldn't fit in that turret. Gerard Smolovich asked, I'm curious, I'm sure this is a dumb question. Does this tank ultimately even need a crew? Potentially, couldn't it be autonomous driven by a wire? So that's a really good question. Yes. Yes, it needs a crew. There are so many things that can go wrong with a tank. And you see failures in a lot of things when it comes to say the war in Ukraine, with the Russian tank systems. Even their automated main guns have issues. And these things are meant to pump out 8 rounds a minute. 8 to 9 rounds a minute is about what the T-72 through the T-90 get on their rate of fire all out of their main tank gun. When they're actually doing rapid shoots, they should get between 8 to 9 rounds per minute with their autoloader. Now, the United States is really good at one thing, and that is making things redundant as hell. Usually when we're fighting a war, it's typically not in the United States. It's one of the blessings of not having any neighbor that wants to take you over, and also being separated by 2 of the largest oceans in the world from anybody that does. That also means, however, that the United States has to literally take everything it needs into combat. If it has to be able to be taken apart on the battlefield and stripped completely down, they need to be able to swap out the engine, the turret, the main gun, the entire suspension system, and any side armor plating in the field or with minimal facilities at a field depot. That is the requirement for military equipment. That's why we don't necessarily have the best stuff. I use PVS-14s that their optics tubes, the 10-year warranty expired in 2003. So I used those PVS-14s my entire career in the Marine Corps. Deployed, not deployed, doesn't matter. But everyone had PVS-14s. Everyone had the capability. They're easy to replace. They're easy to fix. We could fix them in the field. We had optics techs with basic parts that all they had to do was just swap some stuff out. No fancy electronics, none of that fancy stuff. It was just swap out the image tube on it and go. Oh, I just gotta take this apart with a screwdriver and make sure that these 2 little ribbons of wire are connected properly, and it will work if it's having connection issues. Super simple. Dumbly simple for everything that has to be done, but everything has to be done that way. Every aircraft, every piece of equipment, every main battle tank, and these things fail in combat, so they require a crew for redundancy. And sure, you could technically do it all electronically, but what happens if you need to ford through water and someone didn't close the right hatch? Or what if what if something gets damaged? Or what if there's so many things? These are multi-million-dollar tanks, and having one of the big things that you don't get with autonomous, and something that I personally don't like about a crow gunner. I believe real people in a gun turret make a huge difference, because crow systems like the 20mm main gun that you see on the tank, this giant crow system on the top, we have them on our vehicles too. Like, we have them on our current vehicles. 50 cal, 240, Mark 19, we can put those on our crow system. But what you gain in protection, you lose in situational awareness. Knowing what is around you. A person in a turret, and this is coming from a prior turret gunner's perspective, a person in a turret hears what's happening around them, can look 360 degrees around their turret, see what's happening around them, observe the situation, and get those gut feelings of something is wrong. Be the eyes and ears of the entire system, of the entire vehicle. It's hugely important, which is why most of the time we prefer to run a crow system on the lead vehicle, because the lead vehicle is the most likely to hit an IED. So we would like to run a crows on the lead vehicle, because then everyone is inside to be protected, but every other vehicle has a gunner with that situational awareness that can relay to the other vehicles that something is happening. Comms fail all the time, and so we still maintain the ability and need to have the ability to communicate between vehicles vocally. And it's difficult to do it, but you can. You just gotta speak up, use your big boy voice, and yell to the other vehicle to communicate fires and use hand and arm signals and everything else. But that you don't get that ability automating things. So the ideology between Russian and American or NATO doctrine is very open in their vehicle designs. If you look at NATO vehicles, the commander's hatch opens to the rear on any of the NATO vehicles. It opens to the rear, and the commander prefers, even in an engagement, to be outside of the vehicle to maintain situational awareness and to be because he knows what he doesn't see is going to kill him. Russians and T-series vehicles, Eastern Bloc vehicles, the Type 85 TAC-3 also does this. Their commander's hatches open in front of the commander to protect them from sniper fire and stuff like that. So, and they prefer to operate totally enclosed inside of the vehicle to protect the commander. So that way, that way he doesn't get picked off. So they prefer the protection, whereas as a NATO operating standards, we prefer to have the capabilities. We prefer to have the ability to see and know what's going on, because then commanders, the tank commander included, or the vehicle commander, can make intelligent decisions and take personal initiative on the battlefield and immediately react to a situation without having to be told by somebody else. So that's the perk. But that's why they need crews. I mean, sure, they're going more autonomous, and I think that's kind of the future is moving towards more autonomous because it uses less personnel and it puts less people at risk in that case. But I don't think it's there yet, and I don't think it should be totally. War should not be fought like a video game. It needs to be as horrendous as it is, so that way there's not a disconnect. So that way we can keep saying we shouldn't do this ever again. I think that's a fair enough point too. War is a terrible thing. It's not enjoyable. It sucks for everyone involved. There needs to be risk. Removing that risk, disconnecting yourself from the violence, I don't think that helps the mentality of, this should never happen again. There's a disconnect between the action that you're doing and the consequences thereof it. And I think that for mentally, I don't think that's automation's the way to go. Complete automation's not the way to go. Once again, tanks tanks are a supporting asset, so you're still gonna have to put infantrymen into the field too. But so anyway, that's the Abrams X and my ideology behind it and my observations. Ervis coming from Discord says, do Marines operate with tanks? Don't Marines operate within ships or with ships? Yes, we do both. Or we did do both. So I was getting out of the Marine Corps right as I got back home from my second deployment, and I was getting ready to get out of the Marine Corps, and that's when they said that they were getting rid of all of the tanks. And I got to watch Abrams tanks roll off base every single day, constantly, just a constant stream of them from the 1st Tank Battalion there in 29 Palms. So the Marines do both. In the Marine Corps, you're kind of a jack of all trades. The Marine Corps operates air wings, both fixed wing aircraft, so fighter jets, and rotary wing aircraft, so helicopter fleets. We also operate, or did operate, tanks. We operate HIMARS. We operate towed gun artillery, self-propelled artillery. We operate, obviously, infantry, light armored reconnaissance vehicles. We operate amphibious assault craft. We operate, literally, if the Marine Corps is, so here's kind of the difference between the branches. The U.S. Air Force is their entire job is air supremacy and strategic nuclear capability. The entire job of the Army is a standard military force. The whole point of going in and being occupational force, as well as a main wing of ground warfare. So that's the point of the Army, is to be able to go into places like the occupation of Iraq, for instance. During that time, it was mostly the Army. The Marine Corps was there too, but it was mostly the Army. That's their job, is to occupy. That's why they have entire wings of, services and reconstruction, divisions and stuff like that. And Army Corps of Engineers that work on these projects, because they're supposed to go in, help rebuild countries, occupy, and also conduct military operations. That's the point of the Army. The Navy, obviously, submarine, submarine warfare, surface fleet capabilities. Of course, you have the Naval Air Wing, which mostly the carrier fleets and the carrier strike forces. And then the Coast Guard, protecting coastal waters and also subsidizing the Navy whenever there's a large-scale conflict, such as what you saw in World War II, which is why Coast Guard cutters have main guns. They have the Mark V main gun turret on the front. And then the Space Force, I have no idea what they do at all. I guess protect us from alien invasions or something. They were still trying to develop their ranks and uniforms when I was in, so I have no idea what the Space Force actually does as like a military branch. I don't think anyone does. But if they ever make Space Marines, I guess that would be a pretty cool job, huh? And then finally, the Marine Corps. So the Marine Corps' job, knowing what all the other jobs of the other branches are, the Marine Corps' job is to be a strike force. So the Marine Corps is actually, so our job is to go into an area and be able to act independently, but be able to do it at any point in time. There are entire points in the whole point of the Navy, or the whole point of the Marine Corps, is to go out and be able to do island hopping campaigns. So we can do amphibious assaults, we could do helicopter assaults, we could do crisis response forces, we protect U.S. embassies, we protect nuclear weapons. Those are actually the Marine Corps actually has an entire section dedicated to protecting. We protect the president. There's actually the entire, or like a section of Marines that are just for the White House. They're called the White House Marines. But it's a strike force. The Marine Corps is supposed to be able to deploy anywhere in the world within 48 hours. Or not even, but supposed to be anywhere in the world in 8 hours, which is why we constantly have like rotations going to like Darwin and like Thailand and stuff. They're just patrolling out there and doing a bunch of training. And if something happens anywhere here in Asia, the MEU can go and immediately they can conduct an amphibious landing. They can set up artillery bombardment and artillery positions. They can do whatever. And that's actually what happened in Syria. The first boots on the ground in Syria was a U.S. Marine Corps artillery detachment, I believe from the 24th MEU, operating in the Mediterranean. And they went and they got the orders, went to Syria, and literally landed in the middle of nowhere in the desert, set up an artillery fire base, fought off a bunch of the Islamic State guys trying to attack them, and just laid hell onto anybody that needed it. That was called in by Special Forces Operations Forces and also by the SDF. So that was a thing, and that's what it's supposed to be. Super versatile, and it's supposed to be like your emergency response force. Essentially, it's supposed to be able to put troops on the ground to get anywhere in the world. Fair ass, how hard is it to become a White House Marine? Very, but I do know someone who is a White House Marine, so that's kind of cool. But it's very hard to become a White House Marine. Is it true that Marines boot camp is very difficult, like surviving that is almost impossible? Yes and no. It's not. It's very difficult and it challenges you a lot, but it's the easiest thing I ever did in the Marine Corps. And it's not super. It's very difficult. It sucks. Life sucks. Life sucks terribly. But it's, once again, it's the easiest thing I ever did in the Marine Corps. Everything after that was a lot harder. And it's not impossible because it's not set up for you to fail. It's not made for you to fail. It's not. It's designed for you to succeed. If you fail in a system designed for you to succeed, then you probably shouldn't have been a Marine to begin with, or attempted. Yeah. So. Erebus says, so after you get rid of tanks in the Marines, does that mean the Marines are not going to get tank training like you did? I didn't get tank training. So the Marine Corps already got rid of all of its tanks. They gave them all to the Army. Not my call, but I understand why. The Marine Corps, for the last 30 years, we've been fighting in a desert, basically counterinsurgency style. And the Marine Corps' 2030 doctrine was... what the Marine Corps is trying to do now, and most of the other branches, is the whole situation with Ukraine and everything else is not a new one. It's not something that wasn't thought possible. The United States military and the Marine Corps makes it very open with their 2030 doctrine, is what they call it, and you can look it up yourself. You can go look up the Marine Corps 2030 doctrine. It's by the Commandant. And the point is that they're shifting from being a counterinsurgency force and fighting insurgencies in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria to going back to what the purpose is, which is fighting near-peer threats, Russia and China, to put it very obvious for anyone that couldn't think of who that would be. Russia and China, being able to fight Russia and China in a lot of ways. So the Marine Corps understands that more than likely, should another major war break out, especially if China is involved, that it would be a very similar island hopping campaign to that which occurred during World War II. Now, in the modern day and age, tanks in the soft sands of the Pacific, generally speaking, don't hold up very well, especially against long-range anti-armor weapons. It's much better suited that if needed for something like that, that the Army would probably be there anyway if it was that big of an operation to enhance the manpower requirements for such an operation, and therefore they would have tanks with them anyway. But we have other assets, most like our LAVs carry... There's several different variants of LAVs. They carry anything that would really be required to fight with an armored force. They provide enough armor protection with that alone. Anything that really is provided is amphibious with the Marine Corps. The new replacements for the AAVs, I think it's not the LAVs, the AAWs. I don't remember what they are. And the AMVs, I think. But they have armament too, and these things are going, they're amphibious, they can take troops to shore, and then they can provide support. They're lighter, they're faster, and any tanks that we come up with, well, that's why my job exists. I blow tanks up for a living with the Javelin and with the tow systems. And there's LAVs with the tow system on it. And there are trucks and Humvees and MRAPs and MAPVs with the tow system on it. And the Javelin on it. And once again, if it's that big of an operation, the Army's going to be there anyway with a bunch of tanks. But the biggest threat to another tank on the modern battlefield now isn't another tank. It's a guy carrying a couple $100,000 specialized tandem warhead missile. And it can shoot an $80,000 missile and blow up your $4 million tank. So, yeah. So that's, yeah. So no, we don't really need tanks. And I didn't get tank training. I learned how to blow up the things. I really didn't get taught I just know what their capabilities are and like general characteristics to identify them. I've never driven a tank or gotten to I had to learn how they operated just because you need to know what your opponent can do and what you're going to do to counter it. Ervis confused about why someone who operates a warship would be shooting at tanks. That's the Navy's job. That's for the squids, not us. But yes. The Navy does provide gunfire support, though, which is pretty dope. I would love to see a battleship provide gunfire support, but I don't think that's going to happen. We jump over here into Hawaii as we wrap up. Navy are just advancers. They can do it all. They sit on a giant boat and party and shoot at sharks. They make amphibious vehicles. And besides, the Navy is not the one that operates the LHDs. It's the Marine Corps. They have naval personnel on them. Anyway, my brother was in the Navy and was never on a boat either. He was a weatherman. A T-72 in the sea. Well, have you ever seen? You ever seen the T-7? Have you ever seen I think it's like a T-55 that they're dropping off the back of a barge, and it's a little bit of a Russian. Let's see. I'll have to go pull it up. Yes. Here we go. There's your guys' meme for the night. T-72 in the sea. You're welcome. SEALs would absolutely get demolished if they went into a conventional combat. Anyway, over here in Hawaii, as we wrap up the news for the night, sorry for those that are here waiting for the rest of the news, onshore algae farms could feed the world sustainably. How do we increase food production by more than 50% on a limited amount of arable land to feed a projected 10 billion people by 2050? The solution could come from the form of nutrition protein-dense microalgae, or single-celled, grown in onshore seawater-fed aquaculture systems. A recently published paper describes how growing algae on shore could close up projected gap in society's future nutritional demands while also improving the environmental sustainability. We have an opportunity to grow food that is highly nutritious, fast-growing, and we can do it in environments where we're not competing for other uses, says Charles Green, a professor emeritus of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences and Papers, a senior author. And because we're growing it in relatively enclosed and controlled facilities, we don't have the same kind of environmental impact. Take a look at that facility. That's a lot of algae. So much so that, yes, you can, in fact, see it on Google Maps. Oh, I think I clicked something. There we go. So that is the algae farm. That's a big algae farm. Wow, that can feed a lot of people. I've never had any algae. I don't think I've ever ate algae that I'm aware of, like just going out of my way to do so. So I have no idea how that tastes, but I am not a big fan of how it smells. So I can't imagine it's all that good. And over here in Australia, Australia seeks to grow plants on the moon by 2025. Australian scientists are now trying to grow plants on the moon by 2025 in a new mission unveiled Friday that would help pave the way for a future colony. Plant biologist Brett Williams from Queensland University of Technology said seeds would be carried on the Bearsheet 2 spacecraft. They would be watered inside the sealed chamber after landing and monitored for signs of germination and growth. Plants will be chosen based on how they would cope in extreme conditions and how quickly they germinate. So if you guys want to take a look at those, so if you want to learn more from that, you can go check out the article by phys.org. So we might see plants on the moon. We would see the very first green plants on the moon by 2025. We'll see, though. We will see. But with that, that is everything news-wise in the world today. Hopefully you found some of this relatively interesting. But once again, today is a dark day. In the words of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt on December the 8th, 1941, today is a day which will live in infamy. There was a lot of suffering ongoing today. A lot of innocent people were killed, injured, and maimed, and attacks ongoing throughout the world, and a lot of very, very terrible things just happening in general. We're having genocide and ethnic cleansing and flash floods, and there's a lot more, unfortunately, a lot more bad news that will be coming into the future. But regardless of that, we can at least put a little bit of hope back into it for some of these people. Please check out the video description and check out all of those awesome organizations below. And please give as much support to them as you can. We're never doing super chats or anything on this channel. We're never going to be monetizing or merchandising. 100% everything we're going to be doing is charity driven. So you don't have to worry about your money going to like a bad thing. Everything we're doing here is charity. So please be sure to check out down in the description below. Check out and support those organizations. 80% or more of all the donations they receive actually go to helping people with their programs. So with that, I hope that you, your family, and your friends are safe. And if not, I hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. Hopefully, you will join us back once again on Wednesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central for another 48 hours of news and review. My name is Paul from the New News, and have a great night and stay safe, everyone.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляти волновахи, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Нам не треба ні конфлікту, ні війни. Та ми готові всіх вас звать до сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше шлепуйло. Тут для них нема нічого, крім труни. Russian soldiers going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляти до волновахи, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. На моей земле тебе один ответ. Нашим людям с кирпичом, даже танки и бачок. Вам не взять нас и за 100 тысяч лет. Going home, Russian soldiers going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляти до волновахи, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Mr. Putin, on behalf of all our guys, no one's scared of your nuclear device. You can take your top 11, shove it up your wrinkled bum. Oh, we'll come and help you fit it in your skull. Russian soldiers going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляти до волновахи, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Going home, Russian soldiers going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляти до волновахи, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Russian soldiers going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляти до волновахи, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Going home, Russian soldiers going home. Бо идите нахуй.